What if the foods you have been told are healthy are not necessarily the foods helping you age well? You could be filling your kitchen with products labeled natural, high protein, low fat, or heart healthy, and still wake up tired, struggle with cravings, watch your waistline slowly expand, or feel like your body is aging faster than it should. But here is where this story becomes much more interesting. Because when scientists began studying the biological machinery involved in aging, they discovered that longevity wasn't simply about finding one magical food. It was about something happening much deeper inside your cells. And once you understand that mechanism, the way you look at breakfast, dinner, snacks, and even the hours when you don't eat may completely change. Because think about the people who remain active, mentally sharp, and independent into their 90s and sometimes beyond 100. It is tempting to believe they discovered some secret berry, supplement, vitamin, or miracle drink. But the source material points toward a different explanation. Their advantage may come less from one extraordinary ingredient and more from a pattern that repeatedly gives the body the right biological signals. Those signals influence insulin, inflammation, blood vessels, metabolism, and the cellular systems responsible for dealing with damaged material. So the real question isn't simply, what should I eat to live longer? The more revealing question is, what is my food telling my cells to do after I eat it? Imagine your body as an incredibly sophisticated hybrid engine. A good hybrid engine doesn't depend on one fuel source every second of the day. It shifts between systems depending on what is required. Your metabolism has a similar ability. After you eat, nutrients arrive and the body receives a message that energy is available. Insulin rises, cells absorb nutrients, tissues can grow, and energy can be stored. But there is another state your body needs too, and this is the state many modern eating patterns barely allow to happen. When incoming energy pauses, the body can shift away from constant storage and toward maintenance, recycling, and repair. And that distinction matters because aging doesn't suddenly begin when you notice gray hair or wrinkles. Long before anything appears in the mirror, damage can accumulate quietly through metabolic dysfunction, chronic inflammation, oxidative stress, and impaired cellular processes. One unhealthy meal doesn't suddenly make someone old, of course, but repeated signals, day after day and year after year, can influence the environment in which our cells operate. Therefore, longevity becomes less about achieving dietary perfection and more about consistently reducing the biological pressures associated with unhealthy aging. But this is exactly where many people become trapped because modern nutrition culture often encourages us to keep adding things. Add another supplement, add another protein shake, add another healthy snack between meals, add another superfood. Yet one of the most fascinating lessons from modern cell biology suggests that sometimes the body benefits not from adding something, but from temporarily removing something it receives almost continuously: incoming food. And this brings us to one of the most important scientific discoveries behind this entire story. Inside your cells is a remarkable recycling process called autophagy. The word may sound complicated, but the basic idea is surprisingly easy to understand. A busy city operating every day. Cars move through the streets, buildings are used, machines break, garbage accumulates, and infrastructure slowly wears down. The city can continue functioning for a while without maintenance, but eventually the damage catches up. Roads deteriorate, waste piles up, systems become less efficient. Therefore, every functioning city needs periods when maintenance crews can clean, repair, recycle, and replace what is no longer working properly. Your cells face a similar challenge. Proteins can become damaged. Cellular components wear down. Mitochondria, the structures involved in producing cellular energy, can become dysfunctional. The body therefore needs machinery capable of identifying and recycling damaged components. Autophagy is part of that machinery. And this is where the Nobel Prize connection in the title needs to be understood accurately. In 2016, the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine was awarded to Japanese scientist Yoshinori Ohsumi for his discoveries of mechanisms involved in autophagy. His work helped illuminate how cells recycle their own components. That doesn't mean a Nobel Prize was awarded for discovering a particular longevity diet, and it certainly doesn't prove that eating 6 specific foods guarantees anyone will live to 100. But it does give us a fascinating biological window into why the balance between nourishment, growth, stress, and cellular recycling matters. And now something strange happens when you apply this concept to the way many of us eat. From the moment some people wake up, food begins arriving. Breakfast comes first, then perhaps a sweetened coffee. A snack follows a couple of hours later. Lunch arrives, then another snack. Dinner comes in the evening, followed by dessert or something eaten while watching television. Individually, some of those foods might appear perfectly reasonable, but metabolically, the body may be receiving repeated signals that nutrients continue to arrive. So consider the possibility that the problem isn't always one terrible food. Sometimes it is the absence of a break. After eating, insulin rises as part of the normal process of managing nutrients. This isn't bad. Insulin is essential. But the body also needs periods when it isn't constantly responding to another influx of food. The source material emphasizes this alternating rhythm between feeding and fasting because growth and repair are not identical biological states. You need both. Trying to maximize one continuously can come at the expense of the other. Think about renovating a house while simultaneously throwing a huge party inside it every hour of every day. Workers are trying to inspect the wiring and repair damaged walls, but people keep arriving. Music keeps playing. Food keeps being delivered, and nobody ever gives the maintenance crew enough quiet time to work efficiently. Eventually, the solution isn't necessarily to buy better decorations for the party. The solution is to let the party end for a while. That is the idea behind creating reasonable breaks between meals. And no, this doesn't mean starving yourself. It doesn't mean attempting extreme fasts or forcing yourself through hunger simply because longer sounds better. In fact, turning longevity into an endurance competition misses the entire point. The principle is rhythm. Feeding is followed by a period without feeding. Activity is followed by recovery, and growth is balanced by maintenance. A simple example from the source material is an overnight eating break of roughly 12 to 14 hours, such as finishing dinner at 7 p.m. and eating breakfast around 9 a.m. the following morning. For many people, simply eliminating habitual late-night eating can create a longer natural break without requiring an extreme diet. But individual needs differ, and fasting isn't appropriate for everyone, especially people with certain medical conditions, medication requirements, pregnancy, frailty, or a history of eating disorders. So the valuable idea isn't to chase the longest fasting window possible. It is to recognize that your body doesn't necessarily need calories arriving every waking hour, and there is something else hiding inside this pattern: timing. Because eating the same meal at two completely different times may not produce an identical biological response. Your metabolism follows daily rhythms, just like your sleep-wake cycle. Hormones change throughout the day. Insulin sensitivity changes. Digestion changes. Sleep-related biology changes. Therefore, longevity-focused eating isn't only a question of what enters your mouth. It is also a question of when. This becomes especially important late at night. Your body is preparing for sleep, but if a large meal arrives shortly before bed, digestion and nutrient processing continue when other systems are preparing for nighttime recovery. That doesn't mean one late dinner is destroying your health. Life includes celebrations, travel, family dinners, and unpredictable schedules. The problem is the repeated pattern. If eating extends from early morning until immediately before sleep every single day, the body receives very little metabolic downtime. One of the simplest changes may also be one of the least glamorous. Finish eating earlier when practical, and stop turning every quiet evening into another opportunity to snack. But there is another reason this matters, and this one catches many people completely off guard. Insulin. Most people associate insulin almost exclusively with diabetes. But insulin affects far more than blood sugar. Think of it as one of the body's major nutrient management signals. When you eat, particularly carbohydrate-containing foods, glucose enters the bloodstream, and insulin helps move that energy toward tissues that can use or store it. That process is necessary for survival. Trouble develops when cells become less responsive to insulin, and the body has to compensate. Now imagine this happening slowly over years. You may not notice anything dramatic at first. Your morning looks normal. Blood work may even remain within reference ranges for some time. But underneath the surface, your metabolism can gradually become less flexible. Cravings may become harder to control. Visceral fat may accumulate. Blood sugar regulation can deteriorate. And because metabolic health is closely connected with cardiovascular health and other age-related conditions, the choices influencing insulin sensitivity become relevant to how well we age. This is why obsessing over calories alone can miss part of the picture. 2 meals with the same calorie count can have very different structures. One might consist primarily of refined carbohydrates that are rapidly digested, while another contains protein, fiber, minimally processed carbohydrates, and plant compounds. The number printed on a calorie tracker doesn't tell you everything about digestion, satiety, nutrient quality, or the resulting glucose response. And suddenly the foods associated with longevity begin to make more sense. Not because they possess magical anti-aging powers, but because many arrive in a package nature constructed very differently from ultra-processed food. Take berries. A bowl of whole berries contains natural sugars, yes, but those sugars arrive alongside fiber and a complex mixture of plant compounds. Compare that with a sweet drink where much of the structural barrier has disappeared. You can consume the drink rapidly, and the body receives that energy very differently. Therefore, the longevity lesson isn't simply sugar is poison or carbohydrates are bad. Those slogans are too crude. The more useful question is what form the carbohydrate takes, what accompanies it, how much you're consuming, and what the rest of your metabolic pattern looks like. The same principle applies to legumes and lentils. They aren't exciting enough to dominate social media feeds, and nobody needs a luxury subscription to obtain them, but they combine carbohydrates with fiber, plant protein, minerals, and other compounds. Because digestion occurs differently than it does with many refined foods, they can fit naturally into dietary patterns associated with better metabolic health. But now we arrive at an even easier trick. Instead of immediately removing every carbohydrate you enjoy, change the context in which you eat it. Pair carbohydrate-rich foods with protein, vegetables, or other fiber-rich foods rather than repeatedly consuming refined carbohydrates by themselves. Because digestion and absorption are affected by the overall meal, this can help produce a more controlled post-meal response. Suddenly, healthy eating becomes less about declaring entire food groups forbidden and more about constructing meals intelligently. And then comes something so simple that people often underestimate it. Walk not tomorrow morning, not necessarily at a gym. Just move after eating when you can. Your muscles are enormous consumers of glucose, so when you use them after a meal, you give that incoming energy somewhere productive to go. A short walk may look almost laughably insignificant compared with expensive longevity supplements, continuous glucose monitors, cryotherapy chambers, or futuristic anti-aging clinics. But longevity has a frustrating habit of rewarding boring behaviors performed repeatedly. And that is the pattern you're going to notice again and again. The things with greatest practical value often aren't exotic. They are ordinary. Walking, meal structure, vegetables, beans, berries, these keeps. Periods without constant snacking. But don't confuse ordinary with weak, because the next layer of this story explains why certain plants may influence the cellular environment in ways that researchers find particularly interesting. The key word is polyphenols. You have probably heard that green tea, berries, cocoa, coffee, herbs, colorful vegetables, and extra virgin olive oil can fit into healthy dietary patterns. But the interesting part isn't merely that they contain vitamins. Plants produce an enormous variety of bioactive compounds, including polyphenols, and those compounds interact with human biology in complicated ways researchers are still investigating. And here is where the story becomes almost paradoxical. Beneficial plant compounds may work partly because they represent a mild biological challenge. That idea is called hormesis. Think about exercise. When you lift a weight, you aren't making the muscle stronger during the actual repetition, but you are challenging it. The body responds to that challenge by adapting. Therefore, the stress itself can trigger a response that leaves the system better prepared for the future. Certain compounds in plants are discussed through a similar framework. Instead of acting merely as passive nutrients, they can interact with cellular signaling pathways connected with stress responses, metabolism, and inflammation. The source material connects polyphenol-rich foods with pathways involved in cellular repair and metabolic health, which helps explain why food can be thought of as more than calories alone. And now we can finally begin answering the promise in the title. What should you actually eat regularly? Start looking at foods like extra virgin olive oil, berries, legumes, lentils, cruciferous vegetables, leafy greens, green tea, cocoa, nuts, seeds, and other minimally processed plant foods. Not because any one of them guarantees a century of life, but because together they can create a dietary pattern rich in fiber and beneficial plant compounds. Yet even here, there is a trap, because the food industry understands that you want these benefits. So suddenly everything becomes plant-based. A cookie can be plant-based. A heavily processed snack can advertise antioxidants. Sugary cereal can display whole grains across the front of the box. A bottled smoothie can show photographs of berries, leaves, and vegetables while delivering something metabolically very different from eating those whole foods. Therefore, don't judge food only by the marketing language printed on the package. Look at what the food actually is. And one of the easiest ways to make that distinction is fiber. Fiber changes the entire story because it doesn't simply affect how quickly you digest a meal. It also feeds the enormous ecosystem living inside you, your gut microbiome. Trillions of microorganisms inhabit your digestive tract, and they interact with compounds passing through your intestine. When you eat diverse plant foods, you're not only feeding yourself, delivering substrates to microbes capable of transforming parts of those foods into other biologically active compounds. This is why eating one superfood every morning isn't the same thing as eating a diverse diet. Your gut ecosystem thrives on variety. The source material suggests aiming for a wide variety of plant foods across the week, potentially around 30 different types, rather than eating enormous quantities of only one or two vegetables. That variety can include vegetables, fruits, legumes, whole grains, nuts, seeds, herbs, and spices. The number itself shouldn't become another obsessive scorecard, but the principle is powerful. Diversity matters. Notice how different this sounds from most viral longevity advice. There is no miracle capsule, no mysterious powder, no forbidden fruit available only from a remote mountain. Instead, the pattern begins looking almost embarrassingly simple. Eat minimally processed foods, prioritize plant diversity, include protein appropriately, move your body, and give your metabolism regular breaks from incoming energy. But we are not finished because there is one major nutrient that complicates everything: protein. If you're over 50, you have probably heard that you need more of it, because maintaining muscle becomes increasingly important with age. And that is a legitimate concern. Losing too much muscle can threaten strength, mobility, metabolic health, and independence. So protein must be good for longevity, right? Yes, but that answer has a fascinating contradiction, because protein also activates one of the body's major growth pathways, a pathway known as mTOR. Growth is essential because without growth signals, you couldn't effectively rebuild muscle or repair tissues. But cellular biology repeatedly teaches us that more isn't automatically better. The body needs periods of building and periods of maintenance. And that means the nutrient helping preserve the muscle you need for a long life also interacts with the very growth machinery that longevity researchers are trying to understand. So should you eat more protein? Should you eat less? Does the source matter? Does your age change the answer? And most importantly, could the way you distribute protein across the day determine whether you're supporting strength while still allowing periods of cellular maintenance? Because once we answer that, we reach an even more surprising part of the longevity puzzle, involving the food on your plate, the blood vessels feeding your brain, and a tiny molecule your body gradually produces less efficiently as you get older. And that molecule may change what you decide to eat tomorrow.